not everybody has access to being able to perform, right? Because that's not what we're trained to do, especially in higher education. And I would argue why it's so important is because when I get my students to laugh, when I'm goofy, when I talk about, okay, this is how we're going to attach Gingy's leg back on from Shrek using these chemicals, and then all of a sudden their mind goes to Shrek and they think of that scene with Gingy, or wherever I go to in crazy places in my lecture, I'm relaxing them. And we know that a relaxed brain is an open mind. And I can get the concepts in so much stronger. So if I really want them to learn, I need to get them in a place that they can learn. And so laughter opens the mind.
Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How are you today, Nick?
Doing very well. Yourself?
Doing great. It is late May here in New York, and we are on the verge of ending this school year over the next few weeks. And as everybody in education knows, the school year does not wind down one bit. It ramps up and continues to ramp up until you are finally let off the roller coaster ride at the very, very end. And so that's kind of where we are right now, is in those final wild turns around on that ride. But happy to be here and super excited about our guest. Our guest today is Dr. Colleen Kelley, a retired professor of chemistry at the University of Arizona. She's also the creator of a series of comic books designed to inspire children to become fascinated with the magic of chemistry. Yes, you heard that correctly. This labor of love for Dr. Kelley led to a TEDx talk and was featured in a PBS documentary entitled Comic Book Chemistry, which was awarded an Emmy. Dr. Kelley holds a PhD in chemistry from Penn State University. Dr. Kelley, you missed your cue. Was awarded a Chateaubriand Fellowship to conduct research at Université Pasteur in Strasbourg, France, under the direction of Nobel Prize winner Jean-Marie Lehn. She has published 4 chemistry textbooks and over 30 peer-reviewed articles. We can't wait to dive into this conversation with Dr. Kelley. Dr. Kelley, welcome to State of Ed.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here, Mark.
Penn State, right? I tried to put it on a T for you, but you were so good. You were waiting for the intro as we had discussed. So I'm sorry.
Probably more loyal to the University of Arizona now.
No. I'm born and raised in Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and I was going to Penn State football games since I could walk. So the fact that I ended up in graduate school there was a little bit strange for me. I didn't expect to. I wanted to see the world, and there I was back in State College, but it was an amazing experience. So it's in my blood, Nick.
Okay.
I can only imagine. And I will absolutely hold aside the fact that my son, the Hoosier, and that's a Big Ten rival of Penn State. So we won't let that get in the way of our conversation today, I promise.
Okay.
So since you were talking about your roots, can you kind of take us through what sparked your interest in chemistry of all the disciplines?
Right. Yeah. So I am a first generation college student and really wasn't in an environment where education was valued or expected. I just went to school like any other kid in central Pennsylvania. And then in March of 1979, I remember being in my 7th grade English class, and the loudspeakers went off. And there was this announcement that was kind of muddled, and it said, "School is closing because it's raining radiation." And we were so excited because we're
Wow.
7th graders. We ran to the windows and we flung them open and we hung our heads out and we're searching the skies for this magical and mystical raining radiation, which
is exactly what you want to do when it's raining radiation. You want to stick your
we
head
were
out
like,
the
this
window.
could be the coolest thing ever. And then when school was closed, we were sent home on the buses. And I remember getting off the bus and our bus driver told us, he said, "Take your jackets and put them over your heads, kind of like umbrellas, to shield yourself from nuclear fallout." Okay, so I can assure you none of our jackets were made of lead, but we all did that and ran home joyfully like, this is like incredible. And I burst through the doors and I just told everyone at home that this is the best day ever. School's closing. Seems like maybe forever. It's raining radiation. And what other good things could happen except for apparently, according to the news, it's raining radiation like 2 miles from my house. I'm like, that's so cool. It's so close. Like, we're really going to get to see this. And it turns out that was the near nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. So, what sparked my interest was I remember sitting there and watching the news and watching Barbara Walters and hearing her say radioactive particles and cooling towers. And like, what are these words? So I asked my parents, and they're like, well, it's serious and we have to evacuate. And that's all they said. I said, but why? And their answer was, because. And that because changed my life because I thought somebody has got to be able to explain this to me. And I was already a very curious little girl. And I read a ton. I read every book I could get my hands on, mysteries mostly, Agatha Christie, that genre. And I thought, well, this is a mystery to solve. And there are these like invisible enemies called radioactive particles and chemicals. And I wanted to solve this problem. So when it came time in school to learn chemistry, I thought, finally, I get to know more about this, and just really started to pay more attention to chemistry and then kind of connect it with my love for reading and mysteries and putting that all together.
Wow. Dr. Kelley, I taught AP US history for most of my career. So the extent of my teaching about 3 Mile Island was to give them what the answer is on the multiple choice test. I can't believe this is the first-hand account that I ever heard from 3 Mile Island. It would have elevated my lessons tremendously.
Well, next time you teach it, I'll hop on a Zoom.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. Wow.
Can I ask a question? When you finally got to chemistry and you had this long-awaited opportunity to have these questions answered, were you disappointed that it was just sort of like the curriculum being presented to you, or did you have the good fortune of having a really dynamic chemistry teacher who really just poured gasoline on your fire of curiosity?
Yeah, the second I was quite shy in high school and read a lot, and I feel like my chemistry teacher was the first teacher that I actually connected with and that saw me and saw how like I couldn't get enough of it. I always tell the story. This is all right, to your audience, a disclaimer, this happened a long time ago, but I was on the swim team and I used to do everybody's chemistry homework. I couldn't get enough of it. I mean, we'd be on the bus to an away meet and everybody would be handing their homework over to me and I'd be doing it. And it was the most fun I could possibly have.
Where were you when I needed you?
I know. I would go to the pool and before swim practice, they'd say, hey, can you work these problems? Here you go. But it was because my teacher was so good and he understood that I love solving problems and the language just spoke to me. And again, I wasn't brought up in a environment where there were other scientists around. I didn't know any other scientists, but I knew Hercule Poirot from my books and my stories and knew he looked at clues. I just like solving puzzles. So that's where it all came about. But I definitely credit my high school chemistry teacher for igniting the fire.
If you don't mind me asking, what was it about the way that chemistry was taught by that teacher that ignited the fire for you?
It's something that I adopted in my own classrooms years later. He acted. And so if he wanted to show an electron changing energy levels, he would jump from desk to desk, literally. Like we were afraid he was going to fall on us. But he had such energy. And what he did is something that I adopted that eventually became my comic books, is he told stories around them while he was acting. So it became a performance that was robust and rigorous and gave me the foundation to eventually go to college and major in chemistry and do well. So he didn't truncate or dilute any learning, but it was just the energy that day after day after day and humor. And then the ability to kind of see us all as who we were, like really make eye contact with students and tell the stories like that.
So when you were teaching in the college, how many years did you spend teaching in college?
30. Yeah.
Did you teach that to primarily chemistry majors, or was it a mixture of kids that maybe needed a science requirement for college?
Yes, I taught to the thousands and thousands of students who didn't want to be in front of me at all.
You read my mind.
Yeah, I always tell the story about how excited I was going into an auditorium of 200 people for my very first lecture. And at this point, I was teaching at Northern Arizona University, and how excited, like I thought it was going to change their lives. And I walked in and I quickly realized they were looking at me like a female Darth Vader of sorts. And I thought, oh man, not only is it 8 a.m. and there's 200 of you, but you really don't like me and I've not met you.
Like the opposite of Sally Field at the Oscars. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm assuming that that was a bit of a challenge in the beginning of your career.
Year after year, I mean, you have this very skeptical audience year after year. That doesn't change. Chemistry needs a huge rebranding, and that's part of what I'm trying to do. But up until then, they're being told by their roommates, their parents, "Oh, yuck, you have to take that. Good luck, dude." And then they come into me and I have to dislodge all of that lore and culture that tells them it's just going to be a horrible experience.
Yeah, I love that when you were describing your chemistry teacher, you spoke about how energetic and how we infuse storytelling, and it was almost like a form of entertainment. And I know that this is a sore spot for some educators because they feel like they're not there to entertain students, they're there to teach students. So what do you say to those educators who are kind of like reluctant to put that foot forward, if you will, in the classroom and kind of lean into the performance art of teaching as opposed to just the transferring of knowledge?
I understand that stance for sure. And not everybody has access to being able to perform, right? Because that's not what we're trained to do, especially in higher education. And I would argue why it's so important is because when I get my students to laugh, when I'm goofy, when I talk about, okay, this is how we're going to attach Gingy's leg back on from Shrek using these chemicals, and then all of a sudden their mind goes to Shrek and they think of that scene with Gingy, or wherever I go to in crazy places in my lecture, I'm relaxing them. And we know that a relaxed brain is an open mind. And I can get the concepts in so much stronger. So if I really want them to learn, I need to get them in a place that they can learn. And so laughter opens the mind, humor, performance, they're engaged a little bit more. So all of these tricks to open up neural pathways to receive information and assemble them, we should use all of them. So whether it's being soft, kind, making eye contact with them. Even if it's 200 students, I walk up and down the auditorium, look at their papers, chat with them, say, did you see the game last night? That kind of thing. So all of these things are creating an environment. And it's the environment that's, for me, that I need to be relaxed, because otherwise the other barriers for chemistry especially are so high that I don't have a chance for them to learn anything in my room.
So with what you just said, can you describe your journey from, you said 30 years in a college environment to wanting to teach science to 4 to 12-year-olds and create these chemistry comic books and curriculum?
Yeah. So, year after year, I told you the story, or shared the story about students looking at me like a female Darth Vader. And I'm looking back at this audience of mainly pre-meds. They're not chemistry majors, but they want to excel in life and they've got big goals. They might be engineering majors, they might be pre-med, they might be nursing. But most of these kids have received A's since they could tie their shoes. And they have A's in every other class, and they're just excellent and they're motivated. And so I don't have any of those other barriers that maybe other faculty might have, like, well, they're just not studying hard enough. Everybody there is an overachiever. And then they get to organic chemistry. And all of a sudden, Good Will Hunting had it correct. If you go back and watch that movie, the scene about organic chemistry is totally true. So, and all of a sudden they are deflated. They're getting a C or a D, and they don't understand why. I really had to uncover what's happening with this group of students. And I couldn't use the traditional reasoning of not studying hard enough, they're slacking, blah, blah, blah. So I had to really ask the question is, why are they not succeeding in chemistry? And years of research came to the fact that they were coming to college and for the most part were molecularly illiterate. And molecular literacy is a term that I coined with my research, where really we need to teach chemistry like we teach reading, because learning chemistry is like learning to read. So imagine if we delayed teaching the alphabet until a child was in 11th or 12th grade and then sent them to college and had them analyze Hemingway their freshman year,
Hmm.
right? That's precisely what we're doing with chemistry. Might see their first periodic table in high school, and
Right.
then we launch them. And so they have no time to develop literacy. We know literacy takes decades. And the same is true for molecular literacy. And once I realized that they were having this, form of illiteracy, it changes everything, right? Because if someone can't read, you have to start at the beginning.
Right.
And so I thought, well, where do kids really transition from learning to read to reading to learn? And that's about third grade. And I thought, well, if we look at the periodic table as the alphabet of science and take two elements and put them together to make a formula, which is a word, and use the same strategies that they have just used for learning to read, for learning chemistry, what would happen? And that's where I really wanted to get in front of younger audiences. So when I could retire, I did, because I really wanted then to get down to what happens with these younger brains who are at the same spot that the 20-year-olds are. And sometimes I use a music analogy. We know the best time to teach music to children is right around 8 years old, or maybe even younger, right? And so if they hadn't learned music yet, they're going to start where the 8-year-olds start. So whether you're 28 or 108, you're all starting at the beginning. So it's a
Right.
beginner's mindset. So really I call them my littles, my elementary school students are at the same spot as my college students. They're just in smaller bodies, but they have bigger brains in some ways because they have huge imagination still.
Wow. That was very powerful because I don't know how much you know about the reading controversies in our country today.
I
Yeah,
follow them a little bit, yeah.
because that is exactly what's happening. We have kids that really are, they struggle to read. And in 11th grade, we're asking them to, analyze very, very difficult text. So your analogy with science is perfect and makes me want to, get all those comic books to every elementary student in our district right now.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too with that, Nick, and thank you, is I don't expect the teachers to know chemistry either. So it's really important to me when I say ages 8 to 108 that I'm including the teachers in this intergenerational learning. Everybody missed the boat, you know. I'm like the one person who didn't miss the boat in chemistry, but so so let's go back and learn again. I wouldn't know how to teach music to kids, but I know how to teach, right? So I'd use
Right.
my classroom strategies, my management strategies, my teaching strategies. And if someone said, this is how you teach music to kids, here's this comic book series and games, activities and puzzles, lesson plans that are segmented in 5-minute sections. Can you give this a try? I would. So I really think it's important that everyone understands that I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it can be. And it can be really fun. And you just have to try it.
Because
You know,
most of us were taught to muddle through without really having an appreciation for the building blocks that make it beautiful.
Right.
and what I love about what you're saying, so often people will say they'll link, English and math together and say those are primarily more skill based. And then they'll say, but science and social studies are more content based. So we could teach them that at any point. But you're arguing against that. You're saying if we don't have the foundation with kids early on, we can't just throw them into an advanced chemistry class in ninth or 10th grade and expect them to master it. And that's why so many kids probably go to organic chemistry, which I did not take in college, and they have the nightmare experience that you were referring to. So I love the idea of giving these elementary students that foundation to build off of with these comic strips. Great idea, really.
Thank you.
You have mentioned in your work like the need for big league science for today's kids. Can you explain what that is and why today's kids perhaps need a different approach to science?
Yeah. So this is one of the benefits of being in the classroom with pre-K through fourth graders to see what it is they can receive and digest. And when I talk about big league science, I talk about big concepts and skills that I know will serve them in college. So, for example, my fourth graders were getting ready for science fair, and we were looking at rates of chemical reactions. So they were writing the chemical reaction, balancing it, because they had just finished my comic book unit, so they could do all this. So this would be something that would be a lab in college that they would be doing. But I was using baking soda and vinegar, and the gas involved was blowing up a balloon. And at no point did I call it a volcano. Because and I had a one of my students say, Dr. Kelley, what if we just added food coloring? We could call this a volcano. And I just said, is this a volcano? What does a volcano look like? And they told me, and they're like, it's hot and has lava. I'm like, is anything hot? Is there any lava? And so we're really getting into this world of like making slime and making volcanoes and saying that's chemistry. The best slime maker in the world is not going to pass college chemistry. I can assure you. You have to be able to read. So big league chemistry is combining the reading, the understanding, and then putting the experiment and using the right words. Kids want to know the real stuff. I go back to my experience at 3 Mile Island. I didn't want to call it raining radiation. I wanted to know what radioactive particles were. Someone could explain it to me. And I think the more robust and rigorous you are with your science and explaining it to kids, the higher they achieve. They want to know that stuff. So big league science is really just taking what we can and putting it into the elementary school classrooms and making it real. And so baking soda and vinegar is an acid-base reaction. Explain it that way. And so that when they get to biochemistry and they're talking about acids and bases, they'll say, oh, yeah, I know what that is. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just a way of teaching that's not so magic show based.
You know what I love about what you're describing? Well, first of all, you just completely destroyed all of my elementary school science experiments, and but I'll get over that part. The way you describe this need for thinking through a scientist lens or a scientist mindset, why I think it's so critical right now is because you're teaching students to think in an evidence-based way.
Uh-huh.
And we live in a time where that isn't necessarily the case everywhere, just to put it very mildly, where we tend to just believe and use faith over fact very often. And it's not boding well for us right now, at least at this particular time, and without getting too deep. But to teach students to do this, they can transfer that skill to everything in their digital lives and in their, in their societal lives as well as citizens in wherever they're living. Because very often, and now that we're in an AI era, discerning between fact and fiction is going to become more important than ever. So why not start early with teaching young people how to think in an evidence-based way? It'll help in all of their other disciplines, and it'll also help them as well-informed citizens as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I am part of molecular literacy, or actually the whole point of molecular literacy is a global scientist, to make global citizens, global scientists. And I say, chemistry isn't just about science. It's a shared story of everything. And if we want to share our stories and connect with the world, what better way to connect than what the particles that we're all made of? So I really think that globally it's the same language, the elements are the same, the chemistry is the same. So it is one of the most fundamental universal languages that we have.
When you worked on this series, did you do this all by yourself? Did you have some people help you in terms of reviewing it, giving you some feedback in the process? I just know, Marc has written 2 books, and I know that the process is rather daunting to publish works like this.
Right. Yeah. I started over a decade ago on this process, and my original intent was to write these stories as integrated into a chemistry textbook, because I thought, well, this will be such a cool textbook. I'll have these great stories, and then I'll have the concepts, and they can flip back and forth.
Okay.
But there was no comic book in mind. I had been doing some textbook work and I thought, well, this will be just a great, everyone's going to want this. Well, of course, no one did. So I got rejection after rejection after rejection. So the pandemic came along shortly after, and I took what I had and I thought, well, maybe I can make children's books out of these picture books. So I took courses from Highlights. I took courses, any online course I could take on writing children's books. And again,
Oh,
that fell flat. They didn't, it's too much science for a children's book. So comic book was kind of what I landed on as the only format that seemed to be acceptable. So, I had to put on a new hat. Here I am, Dr. Kelley, comic book author. So I had to learn how to write scripts and how to do all that. I had the stories and I wrote the scripts and I knew I had them in my brain. But one of my former students, who's a friend of my son's, was going to Savannah College of Art and Design at the time. And so Mackenzie became a concept artist with me.
Wow.
And
oh, that's great.
he had been in my class at a point, so we could jam back and forth about characters. And then I found a comic book artist who had a team. So then I would send the script and the concept characters to the team, and he had a team working on it. So, this book, the series so far is 4 books, took many, many years, and they're pretty thick. They're not really a typical comic book. Each one's about 50 pages because there's games and activities and puzzles, much like a highlights magazine in the middle. So there's learning objectives and checks and things like that as you go. But yeah, and then I had to find a publisher and I found a publisher. So it all eventually came together, but it took a long time.
What a great story, though.
Amazing.
I didn't realize that the original idea was to just kind of liven up the traditionally boring textbooks that
Yeah.
students. Well, this is really going to be such a great experience for any kid that gets a hand on it.
When you were taking these classes about the storytelling aspect, what lessons did you take away from that, and how did you think to apply them to chemistry and make it so approachable or relevant for a younger audience?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think there was one thing. I think it was actually really the lesson I learned was to just keep writing and keep editing. So it's just write more, submit, get feedback, start again. I did learn a little bit about I didn't know about Lexile because I don't come from an education background. So I learned about what words I can use, can't use, as far as what is a Lexile level. Then I just learned about editing for what am I trying to get across? Can I do it in fewer words? My comic book artist would just shake his head. He said, "This bubble is going to take up the whole page. You have to put a littler bubble." He's like, he said, "I'm used to like putting BAM in a bubble, and you've got like 400 words to go in a bubble." So
Oh, that's
and I had to
great.
learn about, symmetry in panels and how many panels per page and an arc of a story. So there were quite a few nuggets along the way. And
But
then there were
doesn't
some
that
things that I just ignored and went and did my own thing.
I love the bubble example. It says so much in such a short little, snippet. That's teaching. Sometimes we come in with too much and the bubble can't take that much. The bubble is the student. It's not the right medium at that time for that level student. And so you're dealing with the constraints of comic books, but teachers are dealing with constraints also. And I think that's one of the problems with, as we've shifted to technology and presentation software over the last 20 years. Let me use this as an example. When I was starting my teaching journey in the mid 90s, if I were to make a handout, it was on 8.5 by 11 paper. That was my constraint. So it either fit on the 8.5 by 11 paper and it was part of my lesson, or it did not. And it was not part of my lesson. That was it, because we weren't allowed to make packets back then. We were on strict limits on copies. But now with presentation software, I have limitless space. So I can keep adding to the lesson, adding to the lesson, adding to the lesson. So I feel like as the educator, I'm satisfying somehow my curricular obligation to the student, but I am not necessarily meeting the student's needs as far as what they can learn. And the bubble from your illustrator is like the perfect analogy to kind of express that concept. I think it's so profound.
Yeah. I agree with you on overdoing it, and I think all these, you know, PowerPoint, etc., really has has allowed us to kind of go a little bit crazy and overboard.
Or a lot crazy and very overboard. So the storytelling that you find yourself using now, is that in some weird way like an homage to your chemistry teacher and how he brought chemistry to life through storytelling?
It is. And I was lucky to continue to learn chemistry from storytellers. As a freshman in college, I remember my freshman chemistry professor using skits from Saturday Night Live to illustrate concepts. And I thought, well, this is actually makes it fun. So as I kept going on in college, I kept running into storytellers. So I don't know if it was fate, but so there's an homage to a whole crew of mentors who really taught me chemistry in that way. And I'm very grateful for that. I just kept having teachers and professors teach in that manner.
So when you sit down to write a chemistry comic book,
Mhm.
what are the first thoughts that hit your mind in terms of how you're going to present a story and how you're going to build this world that will entice young readers to kind of enter in?
Boy, I don't actually know. I've had this question before about like, what is my process and how do I come up with these? Honestly, it scares me, some of these stories, because they're so wacky and weird and strange. I don't know if I want someone to know that part of my brain. For example, the third comic book is a parody on The Princess Bride, where they have Lady Xena, the dread pirate Clive he's chlorine, has Lady Xenon locked away. And her true love, Sir Carbon, the six electron man, has to come rescue her. So it's this whole Princess Bride and theme going on there. And a lot of times I think I do dream and I lay around and I think, I'm like, what would be kind of fun and funny? And then when they're coming, it's a little bit like a muse, a kind of a very strange experience. The fifth comic book isn't published yet, but it's called Tetrahedral Love Triangle, and it's set in 1970s Hollywood. And I don't know where
Wow.
that came from, but yeah, it has to do with the smog covering the Hollywood sign, and they're going to get rid of
It's
it. It has to
amazing.
do with some carbon dioxide and gases and things like that. But yeah, they're on the set of a Hollywood, and Sir Carbon is starring in that one as well. So anyway,
He's a
yeah, they just
recurring character.
yeah, I have some recurring characters and that helps, but the I like the way that they're not, at no point does it seem like it's chemistry. There's a Princess Bride setting, there's a Hollywood setting. The fourth comic book, they travel to a rock concert to save the vanishing Van Gogh. Starry Night is vanishing, and they go to a rock concert to raise awareness for the vanishing Van Gogh. And of course, the
Wow.
heavy metals are playing, and the lead singer is Led Z. I mean, props to Led Z, and we've got Freddie Mercury on the drums.
Oh my God,
So
it's
yeah,
great.
so
Wow.
it's just I think of things that would be corny, fun, and funny, and just grab things from there. So it's an imagination, and I really do credit years of reading for all this because I have a lot of stories to draw off of, and then kind of twist and make my own.
You certainly have the official title of best retirement job ever. No question. This is really exciting and
Thank
so
you.
enjoyable. And you're going to have such an amazing impact. This is a great idea.
Thank you.
What's been the best reaction that you've received so far from one of your young readers?
It's a subtle reaction. It's when they're reading and you watch their shoulders going up and down and they're laughing. And the other thing is, and I've taken pictures of this, is every time I get the books out in my classroom and they're reading, nobody's in their seats. If you're a teacher, you know what I mean. When their butts are out of their seat and they're laying on top of their desk with their nose on their
Mm,
books. And you want to tell them, sit on your seat with your feet on the ground, but I don't because
uh-uh.
their chests are laying on the table. And that's a body language I see across the board. As soon as they come up, they're up and over the table. It's like they want to dive into the story. And
It's amazing.
they love that, and they'll read it to each other. So sometimes they'll share a book and they'll read aloud to each other. So there's just this very subtle body language that tells me there's no place in the world they'd rather be than with that book and that moment.
It's incredible.
Do
That's
you,
really wonderful.
when you're sitting down like writing these, I know you said, just keep writing and editing and writing and editing, but do you let the science drive the story more, or do you have the background story and then try to infuse the science into it?
I would say to anyone who's trying to do this, and to myself, that you really can't put a division the two. The two have to come together seamlessly, or
Okay.
it's not going to work. So it can't be science driven, it can't be story driven, and that's where I think I've definitely hit the sweet spot. It's not a story about molecules written in comic book format, nor is it just a story with an occasional molecule.
Wow.
It's so integrated that it's seamless, and that's where I think the authenticity comes about with the story.
That's great.
It has to be so difficult to craft. I'm just thinking about it artistically because you
Yeah,
have to
artistically,
constantly
it's
be
a challenge.
wondering, exactly how to pull that off. It's a difficult trick to pull off, and you have to really, it has to run all the way through. Otherwise, you show your hand, yeah, and you don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
do
you
that.
can't show your hand. Yep.
Would you mind like sharing like a little snippet of something with the audience?
Sure. This is one of my favorite segments from File 3, The Case of the Pillaging Pirates. That is, like I said, it's a parody on The Princess Bride. And so what you have on this page is Big Ox is one of Pirate Clive's henchmen, and Big Ox is Oxygen, and he's rowing into shore on this kind of red inner tube that is actually the element iron. And so iron oxide is actually a compound. So iron does carry oxygen in the body in the form of hemoglobin, and then outside the body, iron oxide is rust. So there's so much chemistry just on Big Ox paddling in on the iron, but it doesn't look like that. It just looks like he has a goofy inner tube. And then in black is the man in black. Of course, you have to have the man in black, and the man in black is Sir Carbon, and Carbon is black. It's, coal or, graphene or graphite. And so he has the right coloring. And so Big Ox asks him, so he says, "Forgive me, but I have to ask you, do you have 6 electrons?" And he says, "Yes, I have 6 electrons. Why do you ask?" And so Carbon does have 6 electrons. And so he is the 6 electron man. So there's just a ton of chemistry happening on this page
Wow.
without one element symbol. And so Big Ox, throws the inner tube at him, and he says, "Somehow I feel like I'm supposed to say, all my life I've been looking for the 6 electron man. My name is in Oxygeno Montoya. You killed my father, prepared to die." And then he qualifies that, but none of that is true. Clive just told us to stop you. So if you don't mind, we'll just get
Wow.
you over here. And then he talks Big Ox into joining him, and Big Ox and Red and Rusty become double agents. And the story goes on from there. But I think this is just a great example of how you can seamlessly put a ton of chemistry on a page without any kind of in your face, like this is happening. And so there's a lot to be learned from that.
There most definitely is. That's brilliant.
It's
Thank you. I'll
brilliant, and
stop.
such a great takeoff of one of my favorite movies of all
Me
time.
too.
I love that.
That's great.
You
Wow.
should send that to Christopher Guest. He
You should
played
do.
he played the Six Finger Man.
Oh, he
Yeah.
did. Okay. I was like,
Yeah.
You should. Any plans for an audiobook?
we have them. So we
You
have
do.
free
Okay.
audiobooks available. I partnered with What If World podcast for kids, and he's brilliant. His name is Eric O'Keefe. He's the host of the show, and he makes voiceovers. He's a stand-up comedian, improv kind of guy. And so kids will call into a show and say, what if the world was run by bananas? And he'll improv that on his show. So he's very funny. But what he did with my books is he'll take those characters that you just saw in voiceover for each of them. And he also
Nice.
elevates the story. He's much younger, so he's funnier, adds a little bit more relevant humor. So those are available for free. And what I love about the experience of if a child is reading the book and then I've got the audible on in the background that's voiceover characters, some of my more neurodivergent students and lower readers then are brought right up to the same level. So while you're listening and you're reading and you're looking at the pictures, everybody is having a very similar experience. So if you want to create that in your classroom and literally keep everyone on the same page, you can have the audible going while they're reading at the same time. And they really love that. It's a little bit like the first time I read Harry Potter, and then you go to the movie. So I usually have them read the book first and then hear Eric's rendition of the voices. And they say, I didn't expect Big Ox to sound like that. So it's a nice experience.
Right. Yeah, because graphic novels and comic books are so accessible to young readers. You mentioned lowering the barriers to entry, and then that's exactly what graphic novels and comic books do. So you're hitting on all the right, notes. Wonderful. Where could educators and parents find your comic books?
So for now, they're only available on my website. So kidschemicalsolutions.com. And there's links to purchase with descriptions of everything that's offered. They are being published by Hewitt Learning. So when you go to my website and click, it'll take you to Hewitt Learning as well. So hewittlearning.org has them. I think they're easier to find, though, on my website because Hewitt Learning has other products.
Wonderful.
It's a great product. We'll spread the word to as many people as we can. And every elementary superintendent in the country should be purchasing these because it really is precisely what we need to engage kids at a young age. And of course, teach them a little bit of science and reading and have fun along the way. It's the perfect product. Well done. Congrats.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for taking the time to join us on the podcast today. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you very much. My AP chemistry teacher was a wonderful man, Mr. McManus, and the two of you would have gotten along very, very well. So now I have two great chemistry teachers, I know.
If you'd like to check out previous episodes of State of Ed Podcast, you can find us on the web at stateofedpodcast.com. You could also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or anywhere else that you find podcasts. You can also follow me on Twitter at Marcusix or marcusix.com, or on YouTube at Edupyro, Edupyro, or check out my book, Captivate, Engaging and Empowering Students in a World of Digital Distractions, available on Amazon. Again, Dr. Kelley, thank you so much, and we will absolutely post all of your links and information so our audience can find you and find your comics and all the amazing work that you've been doing, and hopefully we will help you spread all this incredible molecular literacy out into the world for our young learners all over.
Thank you.